Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening presentation of the identification of early summer butterflies with Nick Bowles, and Ellen Strickland will be answering your questions in the chat. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat, or if you'd like to actually speak, you are welcome to as well. So please just use the reaction buttons in the bottom of the Zoom screen. We are recording this evening's presentation, and so if you're happy with that, we shall start. Is there any other housekeeping I have to do? No, I think that's everything. Okay.
I think you got it all, Carla. Thank you. I'll just remind people, because I can see quite a lot of people have got their cameras on. It would really help, please, if we get the full house, the number of people that have booked a ticket. If they all join and everybody's got their videos on, it will mean that the presentation will lag slightly. So if you wouldn't mind, please, putting your cameras off, your video cameras off, it will make it smoother for everybody. Thanks very much. All right. Thank you, Carla. Thanks to the Parks Trust for hosting our meeting again. My name's Nick Bowles, and I shall say now that I'm not going to waste a lot of time, and then of course I'll do what I always do and talk too much and waste time. But let's get straight on with the early summer butterflies. Either Carl or Ellen that you can see the screen.
Yep, all good.
Brilliant, thanks very much. So, seems a little bit wrong to be talking about early summer and when the weather is as it is, but nevertheless. This is a tip that I've given before. Some of you will have heard it, but I was told at a meeting person had been told was to look at the wing edges, because they're so much better at telling you a species than looking at the middle of the wing. And then I'm going to tell you this evening that that's a bit less helpful with the summer species, but it is still really good advice. The wing edges give you so much information, and the middle of the wings tend to be sort of the same color in several species, but the wing edge is very important. And again, to remind you that males can be told from females quite often by the way they behave. So if you see a butterfly fly up from wherever it's sitting and chase another butterfly, then that's almost certainly a male. And if you see a butterfly that's looking at food plants, flying around, not looking at the flowers to take nectar, but looking at the leaves and attempting to settle on the leaves, testing them, then flying to the next plant and so on, that's probably a female. I'm going to go very quickly through the winter hibernators because it's been so cold this spring that they are still about. And almost every slide this evening, you'll see no name for a butterfly to begin with, because you're all supposed to be thinking, I know what that is, it's a so-and-so. And then when the name is revealed, you can pat yourself on the back. So this is one of the winter hibernators that seems to have come through the winter in very good numbers this spring, and they're still about, and they will remain probably another fortnight that you could still see the peacock, which is a butterfly that we know because of the eyes on the wings, both forewing and hindwing, like a peacock's feather, have eyes on it. The underside of the peacock is this very drab dead leaf looking pattern, which helps it to get through the winter, hibernating as an adult, as if it were a leaf amongst other leaves and bits of debris that collect in sort of cold, dark places. Now, some more hibernators that get through, well, two hibernators here and one that isn't. These three are also all around, although one of them, the one here, with the ragged wings and the yellow wing edges, the little triangles called lunules, are yellow or cream on this butterfly. That one is probably almost completely done for the spring, and we need to wait for it to reappear in July. But you might still see that species. The very similar butterfly at the bottom has not cream, but blue lunules around the wing edge. And then this butterfly, which is actually around in quite good numbers at the moment, has come in from Africa. And this one doesn't have either cream or blue lunules. So they're all similar, and they're all nymphalids. And this one at the top is the comma. And the one next to it is the painted lady come in from Africa. And this is a small tortoiseshell. There will be fresh small tortoiseshells about fairly soon, I think, probably by mid-June. So these three can be told apart by looking at their wing edges. Look at the black and white wingtips of the painted lady. Very definitely different from any wingtips on any of the others. The tortoiseshell at the bottom has the much more vivid stripes, black, yellow and white stripes, compared with the sort of orange and black stripes on the comma, far more strikingly contrasted, and the blue lunules, whereas the comma has cream ones. So they should be fairly easy to separate. Of course, if they just fly past you, that's a different matter, but if they settle, should be fairly easy. And one other confusion species, but this particular butterfly hasn't done anything like as well. This butterfly is Red Admiral. Expect you all got that one because it's black and red. It's quite nice and easy. And it says here about the fritillaries and the painted lady being separated by the black and white wingtips, which you will notice if I draw your attention to it. The pattern in this black wingtip corner is identical on these two species. They're very closely related. So Red Admiral, painted lady. And these are the undersides of those two butterflies. And you can see once again, there's very similar patterning, isn't there? Row of dots here, and eye spots, you might call them, on the hind wing, but much less obvious on this butterfly. And you can probably guess which one is which, but just to confirm, the Red Admiral being much darker, the painted lady being absolutely perfectly coloured to blend in with the desert sands in places like Morocco where it spends the winter. Okay, another brown butterfly which is flying at the moment and will keep on flying right through the summer. This one can be noticed because separated, I meant to say, from the others, because it's got these creamy spots. And these creamy spots on the forewing are without any eyes. There is a little bit of a hint of that stripe that we saw on the comet and the tortoiseshell, but what tends to hit you when you see this butterfly is that it's very dark with creamy spots, and the creamy spots do not have black eyes in them at all. If you see it sitting closed in a sunny spot, you'll notice it has a sort of crinkly edge. The veins stand out and the wing bends between them in a way that gives you this cast of shadow depending on where the sun is, of course. This butterfly, let's hope you've all got this one, speckled wood. Okay, now when you put the undersides of the last few butterflies that we looked at together, they can be a bit tricky. We'll just go through them quickly. This one has a very ragged edge to it. And when it sits, you might notice, I think you will, that this is a fairly pale area and then there's a dark band inside, but it's all of a very similar tone. Whereas if we look at this butterfly, which has got a paler outside and a darker middle, there's a more contrast and there's blue here, which should be a good clue because we looked at one just a moment ago with blue lunules just there. This butterfly, dark middle and a paler, but not anything like as pale outside and not the same outline as this wavy one. And then one here, which you might remember having seen just a few moments ago. This little butterfly, a single eye spot there, some patches, some eye spots down here, no eye spots on any of these, look, and this crinkly edge that I referred to. So let's see if you've managed to assign the right names to them in your head. Comma with its wavy outline, blue tortoiseshell with that blue lunule showing through as a blue margin, peacock, less contrasty, and this border being straighter, look, and the speckled wood. Okay. At that point, I'll pause and just ask Ellen if she's got any sign that anybody has a question about the species we've just looked at.
No questions in the chat so far.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellen. That's fine. We'll carry on. I think everyone probably, or most people, will have heard me talk about them in the spring edition of this, so we were covering old ground there. Okay, now as far as I know, there are very, very few of the butterfly on the right, which unfortunately you might be able to guess from the initials I've given it below. But there are many of these about at the moment. So this butterfly is easily told from every other butterfly in Britain by its very pointy wingtips here and here, and its lemon yellow colour. And this one is much darker, and when it flies, it looks more like the colour of custard. And it has black wingtips, which you might be able to see, because when it flies, it has to open its wings. They're not quite so visible when it's shut, although you can see there's a darker area. This white centered spot helps to differentiate it from this butterfly's dark spot. So if something had a go at the edge of the wings here, if a bird had caught it and ripped its wings, that might be a helpful thing to notice, the white center on this butterfly. And these two are the paler one, which has been flying for some weeks, the brimstone, and this one, which has been flying since the middle of April along the south coast in places where we think it bred through the winter, the clouded yellow. Now we're getting into the whites, and I reckon, I always say, they're the worst, the hardest group of all. So one of these, and it tells you at the bottom, doesn't it, has a very small amount of dark scales, whereas one has a very large amount. So the small white has hardly any dark scales, and the large white has a lot, which should mean that you can guess which of these is a small white and a large white fairly easily. Now you'll notice I've written small white M and large white F, and you might be able to work out what that indicates. This butterfly is a male. It has a single spot on the forewing. And this butterfly is a female. It's got two spots and a streak on the forewing. Almost every single member of the white family, the males have a single spot and the females a double. Now there are quite a lot of identification guides that show the small white like this, a male, and the large white like this, a female. And then people see a female small white with two spots and they get mixed up and think they've seen a large white. Or they see a large white with one spot because it's a male and they think it must be a small white. What we should be looking at is the amount of black at the wing edge. Look how this looks like, a bit like the shape of a letter L. To help you remember, that's the large white. And here we have male and female of a species, which I'm hoping you can tell me because we just looked at it. So is this one large or small white? Notice single spot, male, multiple spots, a dash and two spots at least. And which species did you decide these were? Oh, go back. I haven't written it on there. I thought I'd written it on. This is small white because there is a very small amount of dark, a sort of a grey smudge. The female's got a bit more than the male, but it's still only a grey smudge at the corners. Now, occasionally people get mixed up with the female brimstone. Brimstone female looks white in flight. You should remember, I hope I told you about the brimstone having very pointy wingtips. So if you look at these two, you should be able to work out which one's the brimstone. And the green veined white, you can tell just by looking at it, it's a female because it's got more than one spot. One here, and then a couple more. But we know this one's a green veined white because it has, I've said here, chevrons, little triangles perhaps, of grey scales coming in from the wing edge. So once again, the secret's to look at the wing edges. This one for its pointy bits, and this one for the little triangles coming in, which tell us this is a green veined white, not a small white. They're both females. Okay, and now the undersides. So here are three whites, and I'm assuming that you might be able to work out which is which because you will remember that one of them is called the green veined, and you might be able to see why by looking at the pictures, which one appears to have the veins of the wing coloured green. It isn't always quite as striking as it is in this picture. You'll remember that the large white has a large amount of black that comes right round the wingtip. And you'll remember that the small white has a very small amount of black. So with any luck, you'll have looked at these pictures and you'll have decided small white, very small amount of black at the top there, and some grey scales mostly below this midpoint. Green vein white, grey scales along the veins, but not more down here, everywhere along the veins, which means that this species must be large white. Look at the amount of black, large amount of black on the large white. And you can see that the black dots or scales are pretty uniformly distributed. Now, if you look at them, you might even be able to guess whether this one's a male. Gave that away slightly, didn't I? I should have said which sex, and the same which sex this is, but we'll leave that, we'll move on. Right, now one of the white butterflies, which is incredibly easy to identify, is this butterfly, because it has these lovely orange blobs on the forewings. Absolutely beautiful. And the underside has this unmistakable pattern. Abroad, you could confuse it with other species, but in this country, you're not likely to see anything with a pattern like this. So this butterfly is the orange tip, but we will see later that there is a confusion that can occur when you're looking at orange tips and comparing them with the other whites. And this is it. If we go back to the orange tip here, look at the wing tips. Look how it's black and white checkers all along the margin. Wing edges, really important. Black and white checkers. If we go back to the other whites, there is nothing like that. None of the others have a black and white margin like this, a checkered margin. So this, with its black and white checkered margin, must be an orange tip. And it is. It's a female orange tip. So you could argue, well, it looks a bit like the large white because it's got more black, but it doesn't start quite so close to this spot. And it goes around the wing in a slightly different shape, but it's the checkered margin that's a real key. If you see this butterfly sitting with its wings open, if you see it sitting with its wings shut, it looks just like this. The same green pattern, and you can't see whether there's an orange tip or not, because that's hidden on the inside. So female orange tip. And I've put this here just because you'd like, I thought, to see a potential confusion species, the green veined white, which is the one most likely to be confused with it. Look how these edges come down here with these little chevrons, I called them, little triangles, which are quite different from the black and white checkered margin of the female orange tip. This is, once you've seen it, that checkered margin, once you've noticed it and you know to look for it, that checkered margin is a real giveaway that that's not a green veined white. And these triangles coming in really clearly make this one a green veined white. Now, some of you are lucky enough to live in the north of Bucks. And up there, you've got a species that none of the rest of us are going to see unless we travel. So only in the north of Bucks are there woodlands with this white butterfly. This white butterfly has a much more rounded shape. It's not dissimilar to the female orange tip, which is slightly rounded, isn't it? But this is much more rounded, and this forewing is elongated. But the very best way to recognize this species is if you see it flying, it has the most pathetic floppy flight, and it doesn't look as if it's controlling where it goes very well at all. It looks like the slightest wind would blow it off course. In addition, you'll notice that down here, these grey smudges, unlike the green veined white, if we go back, which are along the veins. The wood white, I did put the name up a moment ago. The wood white has the smudging across the veins, look. So very rounded wings, a round spot, grey smudges across the wings, not as in the green vein white where they go along it. But this butterfly is incredibly rare in our area. I'm very happy to say that we've got several owners of large woodlands in North Bucks who have come on board in the last couple of years and are working with us to do what they can to help this butterfly spread. But it really has been struggling in North Bucks, this butterfly, after being completely lost from Berkshire, from Oxfordshire, and all the rest of Bucks. So well done, North Bucks, for hanging on to it. Okay, Ellen, back to you. Have we any questions about those pesky whites, please?
No, still no questions.
Right. Well, either I'm doing really well or people are scared to death to ask a question. We'll find out later. Right, now here are two different species. The top two pictures are one species, and it's slightly odd that they are the same species because when you look at this upper side, the thing you notice is the contrast between the orange and then the black. Whereas when you look at the underside of that same species, the orange forewing is a bit duller, but the black of the hind wing doesn't show at all. It's creamier, grayer. So that might confuse people, but that is the same species. And the way to tell this butterfly from all the other British butterflies, if its wings are open, it's easy because it's the only one with a black hind wing like this compared with a copper coloured forewing. But the underside, look at the orange border here. No other butterfly of approximately this size and colour has an orange border. And this butterfly, hopefully everyone's thought of it by now, small copper, which is definitely flying at the minute, and the numbers should go up. They usually go up right through the summer until the autumn, when it eventually gives up round about October and goes back into the larval form through to next year. Now, a confusion species is down the bottom, and I think you'll agree that you might get a fleeting glimpse of this with its orangey coloured forewing, rather like that, and the grey hind wing, and think, oh, was that a small copper? This is not a small copper. You can see the difference, I'm sure. An eye spot here and a white streak here. That white streak will be really important when we come to look at some of the browns later, because this butterfly gets mixed up with them quite a lot. So this is small copper. This butterfly is the same size. I wonder if we know what this one is. Small heath. And that white streak and an eye spot, very important. Okay, now these are two butterflies that you are unlikely to see. A lot of people will go looking for them, but not many of us will find them. One of them is a butterfly which, as far as we're aware, is sort of officially extinct in this area, but there are some being seen in our area because people release them. And the other is a butterfly which is close to extinction in this area, but is still hanging on at about 10 sites in Berkshire, and that's 5 sites-ish in Berkshire and 5 sites-ish in Buckinghamshire, but unfortunately it's completely gone from Oxfordshire. So does anyone have any idea about these? They both used to be called fritillary, but one had part of its name, the fritillary word, dropped from its name because people suddenly realized after a bit, hang on a minute, it's not actually a fritillary, it just looks like one. So do we know this one is the marsh fritillary? Look at that really obvious contrasty checkerboard there. And these really nice lemony lunules at the bottom on the hind wing. And then the Duke of Burgundy, very pretty little butterfly, a very aggressive little butterfly. I've seen quite a few over the last few days. I've been out specially looking for them because we're so worried about losing them, but their numbers are good, and we found them at a new site this year. Hooray. So this little butterfly takes territories, the males take territories, and it defends them extremely robustly. So if you do see this butterfly and it's a male, you'll be able to stand and watch it as it flies out and attacks anything that dares to go through its airspace, drives everything else away in the hope that eventually it's going to bump into a female. And what I said about the size is worth noting. This butterfly, which is superficially similar to the Duke of Burgundy, is about twice the size. Okay, now we're into the blues, another one of those slightly problem species. I'll just ask Ellen, have any questions popped up?
No questions yet. Just to check everyone knows how to ask a question. There's an option for chat at the bottom of the Zoom interface, and then you can also choose to unmute yourself and ask a question directly if you'd prefer.
We could do that probably best, Ellen. I agree with you. If people can't see the way to do the chat or don't like to type in the chat, they could go to the reaction button at the bottom, and if you click on reaction, you get a choice, and one of them is to raise a hand, and that should be visible to you once they've done it, Ellen, and you would know that they want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Okay, let's carry on. Okay, people, so gird your loins, we're going into the blues, which some people find a bit tricky. And what we have here is a couple of blues which are unusual because, as it says down here at the bottom right, neither species has any red lunules. Okay, so when you look at blue butterflies, if you see them with their wings closed, and in some of the species, even with their wings open, you can see red lunules, little triangles that go along the edge of the wing. But neither one of these have those red lunules. What you will notice is that they do look disturbingly similar. And for that reason, we get quite a lot of reports of this butterfly seen by people in towns, in gardens. And in fact, what they're seeing is this butterfly, because this butterfly is very small. And so people see it and think, well, that's small. When they see this butterfly, which is also small, they think, well, that's small. So unfortunately, both of them get labeled as small blue. But which one is the small blue? Is it this one, which is blue when it opens its wings? Or this one, which, as you can see, is a sort of slaty grey colour when it opens its wings? Which one is the small blue? And what's the other one? So this one is the holly blue. And this one is the small blue. The small blue is much scarcer, and it is not impossible that you would see it in your garden, but it is incredibly unlikely unless you've got kidney vetch growing in your garden, and not many people do have kidney vetch growing in their garden. Kidney vetch only grows on pretty much bare chalk soil. As soon as you get any other vegetation beginning to grow, it outcompetes the kidney vetch. The kidney vetch gives up, goes away, and the small blue will not be in that sort of place because the small blue seems to be extremely good at finding kidney vetch. It can fly miles and find it. We don't know how it does that because it appears to be a small butterfly that doesn't move about much. But I can assure you that if somebody comes in and starts to build houses or a new road, a new railway near where you live, and they expose chalk and kidney vetch starts to grow on it, within about 3 years, you'll be able to walk along. If the kidney vetch is still there, you will see the small blue has appeared magically. It is amazing. The holly blue, on the other hand, in gardens, feeding on a whole variety of garden shrubs. The caterpillars eat the developing berries. They eat the flowers to begin with, and then the developing berries. And they can eat so many different sorts of garden shrubs that this is actually quite common in gardens. And one thing that is worth knowing is that this is a female holly blue. Now, some of you might be thinking, oh, that's surprising. And I would ask you, if I could, why is that surprising? Perhaps you'd tell the others, and you would say, well, usually the females of blue butterflies are brown, but this one is a female that's blue. And I'd say, well done, yes, the only British butterfly which has a blue female, the holly blue. The male's blue too. They're both blue. And the small blue, they're both this slaty grey colour, which can look a bit bluish if the light's right. And in fact, when it flies, the combination of this silvery underside with the white ringed black dots and the grey colour there, that does look blue in flight. This one looks very blue, almost white in flight because it's so pale on the underside. Okay, so as I've said, the females of blue butterflies are normally brown. And here we are, these are obviously not holly blues and they're not small blues. So which could these be? It tells you at the bottom that one of them has got the initials BA, which might well help you. And the BA has checkered margins. So let's look at the margins. Aha. The one on the right has checkered margins. So perhaps you can work out what BA stands for, but maybe you'd like to come back. First of all, the one on the left, what could that be? Which female blue could this be? It's got the red lunules we talked about. Remember, with this one, no red lunules anywhere. On the upper surface or the under, nothing. But almost all the blues do have red lunules. So what could this be? Common blue. So a mostly brown butterfly with red lunules and a little bit of blue near the body. And probably many of you have worked out what BA stands for. Brown Argus. Now the brown Argus is as peculiar as the holly blue in that the holly blue, we just said, the male and the female are both blue. The brown Argus is peculiar because the male and the female are both brown. So the male brown Argus looks very, very similar to the female, but the common blue, the female is brown. The underside of these two butterflies help you to separate them if you weren't quite sure looking at the top, because sometimes, I'll go back for a moment, sometimes the female common blue can be so completely brown in this area that it's very hard to see any blue at all. And then it looks much more like this, but it always looks rather dowdy. The common blue female, I had this description once from someone and I've used it ever since because it's so good. The common blue female looks like she's wearing the dress that she had when she was looking like this, and she wore it for the first time to a really posh reception or a wedding. But after a few wears and several washes, it's beginning to look like this. So the common blue looks like her dress has seen better days. The brown Argus always looks as if it's been turned out today with a sparkling new dress, just straight back from dry cleaning perhaps. But the checkered margins are a very good clue. Brown Argus always has these checkered margins, and the common blue, male and female, always has these clear borders with no veins going through them at all. I put at the bottom about behavior because I told you at the beginning, I hope you remember, males will chase other butterflies. So if you see what looks like a female common blue and it's chasing other butterflies, it could well be a brown Argus, couldn't it? Because the male looks like the female of most blue species. The underside of the common blue and the brown Argus are easier to tell apart than the upper surface because they have some marks which are absolutely faithful. So for instance, just here on the upper wing of the common blue, there is a dot, whereas in the same position on the brown Argus, hope you can see, there is no dot. We know this one's a brown Argus because look, we can see the veins going into the white margin, and here we can see a completely clear margin. There's a smooth arc here on the hind wing. See it? A smooth arc. But with the brown Argus, look how the spots are sort of jiggled about, a bit like a question mark. And these two spots come together to form a little 8. So there's an extra spot on the common blue. There is a bare area, I like alliteration, on the brown Argus. And there's a figure 8 just here on the brown Argus where there is a smooth-ish arc of spots on the common blue. Right, so one of these two is a common blue and one of them isn't. Let's see if first of all you can work out, well, which one's the common blue based on what you know. These are males, aren't they? We know they're males because they're blue. And hopefully you've guessed that the common blue is the one on the left because it has no veins in the borders. There are one or two dark looking marks where little bits have got of the margin veins, whereas when you look at this butterfly, the veins are really obvious. Now remember, it can't be a brown Argus because the male and the female are brown. This is obviously blue. In fact, it's so incredibly blue that the first time you see them, you'll be absolutely astounded. The Adonis blue. And this butterfly can be found in all three counties, but it's mostly down in the south of Oxfordshire and the south of Buckinghamshire. It's beginning to be more common in the middle of Buckinghamshire, but it hasn't yet managed to get either to the middle or north of Oxfordshire, and it's rather unlikely because the soils are wrong, and it probably won't ever get either to the north of Bucks because the caterpillars eat a plant called horseshoe vetch, which only grows on chalk and limestone. Beautiful butterfly though. Now the undersides of these two are really rather similar, but remembering what you've just been told about one, the common blue having clear borders, and the Adonis having its checkered borders, they're not quite as checkered as the holly blue, but they've got veins, black veins going through them. You should be able to work out which is which, and I did put this point in. They've both got red lunules, so we would never mistake them for a holly blue or a small blue because we can see they've got red lunules. Their blue colour, with them being males, means they can't be brown Argus. So which one of these is the Adonis and which one of these is the common blue? Which is the common blue? Which is the Adonis? I'm hoping that everybody got that right because they're remembering that the common blue has the clear border and the Adonis the checkered. Okay, now is a bit of a test. Not very much of a test because I've given away the name of the butterfly at the bottom right. But what do we think the butterfly, the blue butterfly on the left is? The underside here is the underside of that butterfly. What do we reckon these are? Holly blue, did you get it, with the checkering and no red lunules? And common blue, but as I say, I rather gave that away down here. Now, blues get difficult if you're down in Berkshire, along the border, especially with Hampshire, but also with Surrey, and you're on heathland, because there is one more blue down there that we don't get anywhere else, not in Oxfordshire, not in Buckinghamshire. And this blue is unfortunately rather like the common blue. So one of these two is a common blue, and one is this other blue that I'm talking about, which lives on heathland. I wonder if you can guess by looking at the pictures and remembering what you've seen, which one is which? Which one is the common blue? And what's the other butterfly that only lives on heathland? The silver-studded blue has much thicker black inner margins, look. Just inside the white margin, which is clear, just like the common blue, we've got these thick black marginal cells, which make a real contrast between the blue and then the white. It's sort of highlighted with black or underlined with black. So the white stands out much more clearly, more crisply. And this butterfly is slightly smaller than this one, the common blue, but there is a real difference in the amount of black just inside the white border, which should be really obvious, I think, when you see these butterflies. Okay, and now we've got some butterflies, undersides. I've told you pretty much that this one is the silver studded blue. This is the little stud just here. Oh, didn't mean to do that. There's the little stud just that was on this one. What do we know about these two? Let's look at the borders. A clear border, red lunules, a checkered border with red lunules. And we look at the spots, a fairly smooth arc and a disrupted arc. So what do we think? You probably read it. I messed up there. One is a brown Argus and one is a common blue. Which one is which? The brown Argus is this one, because the common blue always has a clear border. And the brown Argus always has this little figure of 8 with the two spots next to each other like this. This is a sort of no pointer really. I'm hoping everyone can get this. As it says at the bottom, there is only one green butterfly in the UK. It looks brown when it flies. It can be difficult to follow in flight because it whips about very, very quickly, usually above head height. You'll see the females coming down to lay because they lay on some low growing plants like bird's foot trefoil, but usually they're seen quite high up. The males perch in bushes. You could walk past and never spot them because they'll sit still for a long time and then do a quick spread. At least butterfly is the green hair streak. And we'll just do these 2 more hair streaks and then we're going to stop to see if there are any questions. This on the left is a white letter hair streak with a fairly obvious white W just there. But much more helpful is to know, and I haven't asked you about the names of these because I'll explain in a moment, but much more helpful is a single solid black line running here inside the red margin. Whereas this butterfly, the black hair streak, doesn't have a single solid black line, look, but a series of black blobs. And there is a hint of a W, but it's not as pronounced. Now, the reason I've told you the names of these rather than ask you is that, one, they're a bit confusing and difficult to separate, but also, once again, only people in the north, but this time of both Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire, will ever get to see the black hair streak locally. The black hair streak is one of Britain's most restricted butterflies. We think it perhaps has, depending on what you mean by a colony, we think it perhaps has about 75 colonies in the UK, and almost all of them are in North Bucks and North Oxfordshire. There are some in Northamptonshire and there are some in Cambridgeshire, and I think there might be one right on the border of Bedfordshire with Northamptonshire. So most of the UK's population of black hair streak are found in woods in North Bucks and North Oxfordshire. It's a butterfly which is only on the wing for 3 weeks of the year. It's extremely good at keeping. Usually only see it if they're lucky enough to find one that's nectaring on a flower, which they don't do very often, to be honest. They're more likely to be just sitting still in the top of a blackthorn bush. Blackthorn is the caterpillar food plant, and that's anywhere near really thick blackthorn in a sheltered position. You might find black hair streak in North Oxfordshire and North Bucks, but you won't find them anywhere below mid Oxfordshire, below Oxford, for instance, and you won't find them below Aylesbury in terms of going south. Now, the butterfly on the left is far more widespread, but it also flies a bit later. So this butterfly might fly in late June, but this year everything's very late. So it probably won't fly till July this year, but I put it in because the confusion of these 2 species is highly likely. The black hair streak will be flying in a usual year from the end of May, but this year probably from the beginning of June. This one probably late June or early July. But the white letter hair streak can be seen right across the 3 counties, anywhere where you've got some relatively tall and healthy looking elm trees. Doesn't really matter what the species is. The caterpillars eat elm, and the adults will often spend nearly all their life at the top of the elm tree. They do come down, and one of the food nectar sources they're really fond of is creeping thistle. But they'll come down to a variety of flowers, especially in dry weather. So at the moment, they probably wouldn't bother, but they're not flying yet. And I don't think they really should be included in an early summer butterfly talk when we've got such bad weather as we've had this year. But in a normal year of the recent sort, they will be flying in June. I don't think we'll see them this year. We might. There might be some very sheltered spots where they've kept a bit warmer, and somebody will report white letter hair streak with this solid black line in June. The black hair streak is the real prize, though, that people travel from all over the country to come and see because it's got such a limited distribution. And there will be some black hair streak walks this year, but I already know that our dear friends at HS2 have closed the road to one of the woods, which is a place that we had advertised a walk to see the black hair streak. So a lot of thinking is going on behind the scenes about how we're going to get people to go out and look for black hair streak. And at the moment, we haven't come up with a solution because, unfortunately, as some of you will have read, the black hair streak lives between Oxford and Cambridge in that band that goes through Oxford, Buckinghamshire, Northamptonshire and into Cambridgeshire. And it's exactly where they're building the new, or they've scrapped the idea now of having a really big road, but they're improving all the links, the communication links between Oxford and Cambridge. There was going to be a new motorway effectively linking them and new towns along the motorway. That idea has been slightly scaled down, but the rail links are improving. So they're building the railway through that corridor where this butterfly lives, or reopening the railway, perhaps I should say, and widening some parts of it, rebuilding quite a lot of it. And they're also putting HS2 through the very best bits of Buckinghamshire, where we would normally expect to see this butterfly. But unfortunately, because this butterfly lives in bits of woodland and scruffy little places with lots of blackthorn, that's exactly the sort of place that planners decide to put new railways, new roads and so on, rather than farmland, which is a bit more productive. So the black hair streak is really suffering, and our current 75 colonies could well be dropping in the next couple of years to 60 or so because of the pressure this butterfly is under from development. So maybe this would be a good summer to get out and look for the black hair streak while there's still a few more places that you can go and look for it. So the white letter hair streak, black band, fairly big white W, and the black hair streak with the black blobs. And we're coming on to the skippers, but I'll just go back to the hair streak because we did the blues and the hair streaks, and perhaps by now there is a question.
Yeah, we got 2 questions. The first one that came in a while ago is, are most of these butterflies seen nationwide?
Yes, every single butterfly that we've got in our area is seen in some other parts of Britain, and I've just been through with the black hair streak that one is very limited. The Adonis blue that we looked at a minute ago only comes as far north approximately as we are with our 3 counties. It's across in Gloucestershire, but it isn't common anywhere else really. There's an introduced colony of Adonis in Hertfordshire now at Thurfield Heath. But the Adonis blue is limited to the south. The clouded yellow will go north as the year progresses by successive broods of that butterfly migrating north. And the silver-studded blue is limited to heathy land, but it goes as far north as Shropshire. So it's where heathland is that's the limit on the silver-studded blue, but most of the others that we've got in our area go right the way across the country, unless I've forgotten one that's restricted, but I don't think so.
And the second question is, why is the black hair streak so restricted when blackthorn is everywhere?
That's a very good question. Thanks for asking it, Ellen, and thank you whoever wrote that one in. The simple answer is we don't know. We do know that in the last 20 or 30 years, people have been coming to our area and taking eggs, caterpillars from blackthorn bushes in our area and taking them away and starting new colonies in other parts of Britain, which for the moment are persisting. Now, we think the reason that the black hair streak lives with us and not with many other people is that the very poor clay soils of the Oxford Vale and Aylesbury Vale was so bad for most things that even woodland management in those areas was extremely slow and difficult. You couldn't grow trees quickly, the soil was too poor. It gets waterlogged in the winter, it's very heavy and cold, and then in the summer it gets very dry, it cracks and dries out. So right the way across the band of land in which the black hair streak lives, the blackthorn bushes were able to grow big and tall, big and strong, because the trees didn't grow very quickly. And rapidly growing trees would shade the blackthorn, and that would lead to the blackthorn becoming moribund and dying. But in the area where the black hair streak lives, the blackthorn bushes had a sort of protected life because they could grow on that very wet, cold soil, but trees couldn't. In other parts of Britain, the trees grew so quickly compared with the blackthorn that they fairly quickly overshadowed it. So in some parts of Britain where people have got rather extensive blackthorn and they're keeping it clear of trees overshading it, they've managed to introduce black hair streak. But in the past, those areas would have been cleared because they were productive land for agriculture, or they would have been forested with big trees that were worth some money, whereas blackthorn wasn't. I think that's probably as close an answer as we're ever going to get, because nobody really knows, I'm afraid. Anything else come in?
No, that's the only question so far.
Right, thanks, Ellen. I'll plough on. Everybody's doing very well, I think, if they're all keeping up. So now we're looking at some skippers, and there are two skippers here which are both flying at the moment, and they should keep on flying right the way through June. In a normal year, numbers would drop off rapidly in the last part of June, but this year things have been so miserable, it may well be that they'll be in fairly good numbers right the way through. And both these species do seem to be in better numbers this year than for some time, which is good because they're both BAP species, they're both suffering badly. On the left, we have a species which feeds on a whole variety of plants, including bramble. So you'd think, well, it should be everywhere. But just like the question about blackthorn, the thing is the bramble has to be growing in the right place. That and a whole load of other plants, agrimony, creeping cinquefoil, strawberry, it can eat loads of different things, the caterpillars of this butterfly, but they have to be growing right next to bare ground so that the caterpillars warm up with the sun heating the soil and the radiant heat warming the caterpillar. And the same for this fellow on the right. Birdsfoot trefoil and horseshoe vetch for the caterpillars of this one, and again next to bare soil, so that the caterpillars can get really warm when the sun shines and heats the soil, and the radiant heat helps the caterpillar to digest its food. So I wonder if we know what these two skippers are. Grizzled skipper, the almost black and white, and the dingy skipper, the rather unfortunately named butterfly here. They both come in a slightly varied range of colours rather than patterns. The patterns stay the same, but the dingy skipper can look grayer, and the grizzled skipper can also look quite a bit paler. But two small and very rapidly flying butterflies that zip about and make it quite hard to follow where they're going. If you look at them when they're roosting, they almost always roost on the top of flower heads, dead flower heads. Last year's marjoram is a favourite for roosting grizzled skipper. And the dingy skipper is very unusual because this is it roosting. It wraps its wings around last year's knapweed heads usually, but can use some other plants. So it actually wraps itself around and exposes its body, unlike all the other butterflies that close their wings in this pattern. And as I've said, beware similar looking day flying moths. So here are 2 butterflies and 2 day flying moths. Which are which? Can you spot the butterflies? Here is a moth. It's called the Mother Shipton because just here is the face, and there of course is the face of a witch. Mother Shipton was a famous witch who lived in Yorkshire. She had an extremely sticking out chin, and if we go up to her eye and past it, a very sticky out nose. And it was obvious proof that this ugly woman was a witch that there was a moth that had her face on it. But she wasn't burnt at the stake, as far as I know. She lived a fairly happy life selling magic spells to people. So in her case, it didn't turn out too badly. That's the Mother Shipton day flying moth, which, as you can imagine, does sometimes get confused with one of the butterflies. But which is the other moth? Here we are. A slightly more colourful Burnet companion compared with the similar looking dingy skipper. This one looks more orange in flight, considerably more orange in flight, and you might mistake it for a small copper. But when it settles, you might mistake it for a dingy skipper. These, of course, are just 2 of the many, many day-flying moths. By the way, this one's the grizzled skipper, and this one the dingy. Bottom left grizzled, top right dingy. Here are a few more of the moths I see most commonly. So the cinnabar, which will be flying about soon, that's the moth, red and black moth, which has caterpillars, yellow and black caterpillars feeding on ragwort. The common carpet, the caterpillars feed on a whole variety of different plants, mostly bedstraws, I think. The mint moth, which you perhaps see in your garden, absolutely tiny but beautiful. And this feeds on marjoram, mint, various sorts, and other related plants. The caterpillars, I mean, feed on that. The treble bar, which has an extremely similar lesser treble bar look-alike, very hard to tell apart in the field. And I've completely forgotten what the caterpillars feed on, forgive me, but all these that you see on this page will be found in good quality grasslands. And the cinnabar, because it eats ragwort, can be found in towns where bits of waste ground have got some ragwort growing. This moth here, the silver white, is a migrant, so you find that literally everywhere, and it can build up in very large numbers. Silver white is another one of these species that can eat lots of things, including dandelion leaves for the caterpillar of silver white, but it doesn't normally choose dandelion. It can eat a whole variety of things though. And this is a rather strikingly marked yellow shell, another day-flying moth, which is fairly common in this region in better quality grasslands. So there are actually more day-flying moth species in the UK than there are butterflies, but they tend to get overlooked, which is a bit odd because, as you can see, they are as attractively marked as some of our butterflies are. Anyway, let's press on. So we're still with the skippers, but we're into the summer skippers now. And the summer skippers are, again, a group that's slightly difficult to tell apart. So what I've put here is a differentiation which you probably aren't going to have to trouble yourself with at all, because on the right-hand side, these 2 pictures show a very rare skipper found in the south of Oxfordshire, in the south of Buckinghamshire, and previously in many parts of Berkshire, but it appears to have gone. It probably still is in Berkshire, but we haven't had a report of it from Berkshire for a few years. So keep your eyes out. But this particular butterfly on the right, that definitely won't be flying before July. So it's not really an early summer species, but I put it in because it's so similar looking to the butterfly on the left. Now, the butterfly on the left is, you might say, the sort of light version of the butterfly on the right. This one is quite strikingly marked with fairly brilliant colors, a very strongly contrasted pale series of spots here and on the underwing. much more obviously contrasted pale spots against a darker background. And this butterfly on the right flies about far more strongly. When you see it flying, it looks really robust and forceful, whereas the butterfly on the left doesn't give the same feeling of power, and it does tend to fly a bit higher too, visiting plants like creeping thistle and so on above the ground up to sort of shoulder height, even going up into bushes to feed on things like brambles once they start to flower. But the butterfly on the right tends to stay much closer to the ground. So this butterfly, with its less contrasty spotty pattern, is called large skipper. And this butterfly is the silver spotted skipper. But as I say, the only one you're going to see in June is this fellow. You might see large skipper in May, but the weather has been so poor, things are late. And it's these spots near the body of the silver spotted skipper to help you to be absolutely sure you've seen it and that it wasn't just a brightly marked, because the female large skipper can be quite brightly marked, but look, there's nothing like those spots. These spots here on some female large skippers can be fairly strongly marked, which might make you think at first, oh, that could be a silver spotted skipper, but not unless it's got these marks close to the body. Those are the key. So for once, I'm not telling you to look at the wing edges, but to look at spots close to the body. An exception that proves the rule. Now, two more skippers that fly in the summer, and these two look so similar that a lot of people who go out recording butterflies refer to them as smessics. And I've written down their names on here because there's very little point trying to get people to guess unless they know which one is which. And as I've said, the small skipper, if you see it with its wings open and it's a male, you can see this fairly long and curved scent mark. And the Essex skipper, if you see it with its wings open and it's a male, there is this short scent mark here. Not a big difference, but it is obvious in the field if you get a good view of them with their wings open. If it's a female, of course, that doesn't work, and they both look pretty much identical, apart from if you can get low enough, or if you can get your camera low enough to take a picture of the underneath, and I stress that, the underneath of the antenna. So Essex has an abrupt change to a very dark black tip. So which of these two is the Essex? Can you see how this is brown, dark brown? And in poor light, or with a poor view, you might consider that these tips are dark enough to say, oh, it's an Essex skipper. But there's a real contrast. These tend, not quite so obvious on this specimen, but very often there's a gradual change along the antenna from this creamy color through darker sandy colors to the dark tip, whereas here there is always a very abrupt change. And that's why people refer to it as an inky tip, because it looks rather like the Essex skipper has been held by its wings and dipped so that the antennae just go into the ink. And the tips are very contrasted as a result. Here the change is more gradual, but it never goes quite as dark on the underside. The upper side of the antenna both are black. So what have we got here, folks? See if you can work out what these are. I'm hoping that you can see that this one, as it says, has got some pale spots. This one's got none. And the underside of the antenna, well, that's difficult to decide, isn't it? From this view, we can't see the underside properly. So let's hope you've worked out this is a large skipper, not silver spotted, because the spots are there, but they're not really contrasty. And this is either a small or an Essex skipper. And quite honestly, from this picture, you cannot tell. You need to see the underside of the antenna, or the wings have got to be open so that you can see on a male the scent scale. And that's why, as I said at the beginning, some people refer to them as smessics, small Essex, because you can't tell the difference in most sightings of this butterfly. Okay, browns. Before we go on to the browns, Ellen, do your bit, please. Are there any questions?
Yeah, we've got some questions. So the first one was, does the grizzled skipper get confused with the latticed heath moth?
Yes, but the lattice heath moth has a different flight. So it's a little bit more floppy. It's a slightly larger creature. The grizzled skipper is small and very zippy. So you could tell them apart by their flight, but yes, it does. The lattice heath isn't especially common these days, but then I guess the grizzled skipper isn't either. So you might see both on the same site. I didn't put a picture of a lattice heath in because it didn't seem to me to be as likely that it would be confused with the grizzled skipper as the mother Shipton, but it is a confusion possibility.
Okay, thank you. And then how late do you think we are for butterflies to be on the wing, and will we catch up?
It's very strange. The very first butterflies of most species have been seen early this year, but I think that might be because so many people look for butterflies these days that there's always somebody out and about, even in bad weather, who knows what butterflies are, because people used to be a lot more ignorant than people are these days of what they were seeing. Therefore, lots of butterflies have been reported early this year, but things are getting later. We're about a fortnight late now, maybe even getting on for 3 weeks late for the main emergence. That is to say, the largest number of each species. I don't know whether they will catch up, but they might, because it will only need 2 or 3 weeks of really hot weather and everything will catch up again. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter if things run a bit late, because the last few years, August has been fairly quiet because all the butterflies that we normally see in August were flying in July. And there's plenty of time for them to complete their life cycles if they don't fly till August, because there's still plenty of warm weather in September and October for the eggs to hatch and the caterpillars to feed up ready for hibernation. So my guess is that things will stay late, but that really won't be a problem because butterflies in this country have coped with rubbish summers probably ever since the British Isles broke off from the continent of Europe, and they're well used to having to deal with soggy, hardly warm summers. It's a feature of being in Britain, isn't it, that we get these summers every now and again, so they'll be okay.
And then the final question so far is the inky tip on the Essex skipper
I made about the skippers so far, about the way you can tell them apart, refer to the male and female. There's very little difference between the males and females, apart from that little scent band on the male's wing, on the upper side of the male's wing. Thank you, Ellen. I'll carry on and we'll look at the browns. We're getting towards the end, folks. If you've managed to keep abreast of what's going on and you think you're remembering it, well done. And you're near the end, so pluck up your courage for one last effort, because here we go with the browns. So I'll go through what it says here. Meadow brown, single black eye spot, ringlet, multiple eye spots, and speckled wood, creamy spots. Now, we looked at a speckled wood earlier, so you should remember, I think. This was a speckled wood. Quite a few creamy spots without pupils. There is no black pupil and there's no white highlight inside that black pupil. So it does have some eyes which are marked with black pupils, but it's got even more that aren't. Which means one of these is a ringlet and one of these is a meadow brown. And having read that the meadow brown has a single black eye spot with a single white pupil in the middle of the black eye spot, this must be the meadow brown. Let's see if we got that right. Yep, ringlet, multiple spots, especially on the hind wing. Sometimes the forewing doesn't seem to have any spots at all, but there we are. The hind wing always has these spots. Orangey halo, black center, white spot. Meadow brown, again, an orangey halo, black center, white spot. These are male butterflies, by the way, and the speckled wood. The female in the ringlet looks almost identical. The female in the meadow brown has a much larger area of quite bright orange just here, but still a single eye spot with a single white pupil. The female ringlet looks very similar. Another way of telling ringlets from meadow browns when the ringlet is very freshly emerged is the contrast between the white border and the black wing. In the meadow brown, you can see it's a slightly grayish. Looks like it's been washed several times with things that shouldn't have been in the same wash. So there's less contrast between the wing and the border. Now, the undersides of those butterflies, and you'll be finding this easy by now because you're starting to get the idea. What we were looking for with the meadow brown was a single eye spot. So which butterfly appears to have a single eye spot? Oh, bother, 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. Well, we know that one isn't a meadow brown because it doesn't have a single eye spot. So one of these is a meadow brown. Small heath bright orange, that's that. And a pale streak only halfway. That's on the hind wing. Can you see how the meadow brown, I've given it away now, haven't I? The meadow brown, the streak goes right down the hind wing, but it only goes part way on the small heath. So what have we got? We've got meadow brown and ringlet, multiple eye spots. In the ringlet, each one is, I've said, a creamy halo around each one. I suppose you might argue for yellow, but anyway, not like these butterflies, which have a completely different sort of blob of colour, not a halo. And the speckled wood with that crinkly look that we mentioned earlier. So a completely pale streak right the way down the wing of the meadow brown. There's another butterfly that isn't included in this talk that we'll see in this area of the Upper Thames branch in later summer, where looking at this white stripe is important. But I get a lot of confusions. I think it's the commonest confusion I've seen is that the small heath is always shown in identification guides and books looking like this. And the meadow brown, to go back a slide, is shown looking like this with its wings open. So when people see a meadow brown when they're out in the field and they see a meadow brown with its wings shut, they remember this pattern and think, oh, it's a small heath. No, meadow brown, complete pale line here, right the way across the hind wing. Small heath with just a small streak here on the hind wing. And the speckled wood, as we've talked about earlier, quite a few little eye spots there, but one major one there, and the crinkly look. One more of the browns, and I've included a white at the bottom here because this white can be confused. I've known people to say that this butterfly at the top, I've given the name away with it, writing it there, is this white at the bottom, and I've also had people send me records of this butterfly, misnaming it as the one at the top, and I'm afraid, as I say, I've given it away. I didn't realize that, silly of me. But anyway, this is the marbled white, absolutely beautiful butterfly, gorgeous. Caterpillars eat grass, as do all the browns. So in a way, it's slightly surprising. It is an even commoner, but the trouble is it can't live in any grass. The caterpillars of this butterfly cannot live in any grass that gets mowed. Most of the brown butterflies really struggle with grass that gets mowed. That's why butterfly conservation, along with plant life, are insisting that people please stop mowing everything. What's the point? Anyway, that's for a separate talk. And down the bottom, we've got the green-veined white. Please notice how the bands of dark scales on the marbled white go across the veins. Similar, you remember the wood white, but a very different pattern on the wood white. And the green vein white, they go along the veins. All right, just a couple more butterflies to go through now. Doing very well, everybody. So here we've got a picture of two really quite similar butterflies, and I ought to picture here because quite often this larger butterfly on the left looks as black as the butterfly on the right. You only get this purpley color, and if that isn't giving away the name of this butterfly, nothing will. You only get this purpley color when the wings are held at a certain angle to the light. So this butterfly, as you probably all guessed, is the purple emperor. And the purple emperor is our biggest butterfly apart from the swallowtail, with a really strong and determined flight. So if you're out in a woodland and something really big and dark flies across high up in a very determined way, it looks like it knows where it's going, then it's probably a purple emperor, but it is big. So we're talking about something larger than a red admiral. Whereas the white admiral is about the size of a red admiral, and it flies in a way that suggests it's not quite sure where it left something and it's looking for it, because it flies up and down rides, constantly flying down rides, turning around, flying back along the ride, and then turning again and coming back the other way. The purple emperor very rarely does that. You will see it turn, the purple emperor, turn from the path it's following if it spots another purple emperor or something it thinks just might be. Even small birds will get chased by a purple emperor. Large bees, sometimes bumblebees, will get chased by purple emperor, but it usually looks as if it's flying in a particular direction and keeps going that way very purposefully. The white admiral, on the opposite way of flying about and finding mates, tends to do lots of jinks and turns, and it reminds me somewhat of a sparrowhawk, because you'll see it do several powerful flaps of its wings and then glide, and then several powerful flaps and a glide. Purple emperor very much less likely to glide unless it's coming down from high up to the forest floor. The purple emperor is the one which you'll see on the floor feeding from things like dog poo, and that's one of the very few reasons to be grateful for so many millions of dog owners in this country, because when they walk, and a very good place to go to observe this is Burnwood Forest, where people park in the car park at Burnwood Forest and empty their dogs on the footpath straight outside the car park, and then forget to clear up after themselves. And that's a place where many people have seen purple emperors for the first time and repeatedly to get really nice photos. This is a better picture because it isn't actually sitting on a dog poo, but you will find purple emperors there in Burnwood Forest. And the dog poos, fresh dog poos, are a great attractant to this butterfly, the male of this species. White admiral, much more likely to be seen feeding from brambles, far more delicate in its habits. And the white admiral is found in woods which are a bit more overgrown by and large than the woods where you find the purple emperor, because the purple emperor, the caterpillars eat sallows, willows, and they can grow in almost all woods by growing on the very edge, the outside of the wood. So it doesn't really matter whether the wood's quite open or relatively dense, as long as there's sallows and willows on the outside. And even sallows and willows just along the bank of a river or a canal will suffice as a breeding area for purple emperors. They're very widespread. The white admiral, on the other hand, the caterpillars only eat honeysuckle growing in shade in fairly dense woodland. And this dense woodland has to have both the honeysuckle growing in shade somewhere, plus nice sunny rides with flowers for the adults, which is why this butterfly is probably scarcer, the white admiral, than the purple emperor. Now, when they settle, if they settle at a distance from you, and you're looking perhaps against the light and it's hard to see what you're looking at, binoculars are a really good tip if you're looking for either of these butterflies, because they can settle quite high up. Look for the eyes on the emperor. Once more, alliteration comes to be our friend. The emperor has eyes, and the white admiral does not. You'll notice that if you want to get into really nitpicking things, the purple emperor also has an extra white spot here. That there are 2 white spots on the forewing and only 1 on the white admiral. But that's hard to see at a distance, especially against the light when they're up in a tree. The eyes, though, are easier to see, and particularly if the butterflies close their wings, because then the purple emperor reveals two eyes. But the white streak here isn't especially helpful because there is a similar one on both species. You'll notice the purple emperor's is much more finely tapered to a point. The white admiral is a wider band all the way. And the white admiral has this big area of white close to the body, which stands out really clearly on fresh specimens. But as the butterfly ages and its colours dull, then that isn't quite so obvious. But on a fresh white admiral, this amount of white here really does stand out, because on a fresh emperor, that's always a greyish part of the body. Okay, so emperors best told by their eyes. Their large size isn't always easy to judge because they're so high up and it's difficult to tell. Is that something the size of a red admiral or a white admiral flying around at about 10, 12 meters up, or is it a purple emperor flying around about 20 meters up? There's often very little to gauge their size by, but the power of their flight and their determination to go in a straight line or to dither about as if they've lost something helps with that. Oh, one more thing. The male purple emperor that comes down to the ground absorbing minerals and so on is the one with the purple sheen, but it often just looks black depending on the light. And the female purple emperor always looks completely black on both wings. It has none of that purple sheen. And the female purple emperor can be seen flying around those sallows on which it wants to lay its eggs. So you're actually more likely to see a female purple emperor flying around about head height or just slightly higher. The male purple emperor either right at the top of the tallest trees in the area or down at the ground. So it doesn't do that sort of mid-level flight quite so often. The white admiral very rarely down at the ground, although it can come down. Okay, I think that's probably separated those two. And they're both fairly widespread. You can find them in all three counties, but the number of woodlands with white admiral is unfortunately increasingly few, whereas the purple emperor seems to be able to find willows and sallows in almost every landscape, including in towns. And so the numbers are very small, but they're widespread right across our three counties. Okay, I'm just going to run through a very short piece about recording. One of the reasons we do this, helping people to identify what they see, is that we hope they will then record what they've seen and give us an accurate picture of what's going on. And just to point out to people who use the iRecord butterflies on their smartphone, the app has been updated. This is the new look app with some extra features. For instance, you can now record whether you saw a caterpillar, an egg, a pupa, or an adult. And there are new images, look, for the identification guide. The information about each species is the same, but this information is now provided in a form where it begins with the species they think you are most likely to see on that day in that location. You might remember it was similar before, but there was one butterfly above another in a list. They've now gone to this, and instead of photos, they've got illustrations, which is better. So that's the free app for smartphones. Really clever because it uses your phone's GPS to locate you, makes it very easy to give good, accurate records of where you've been and exactly what you saw when you were there. If you don't like using a smartphone, or if you don't want to use your smartphone when you're out and about, then you can do all your recording online. And there is this Butterflies for the New Millennium recording. This is something which has been set up rather like the last one. Actually, the last app was a collaboration between the Biological Record Centre, CEH, and Butterfly Conservation. So you can find this by searching for it with any search engine. You'll find the recording portal, Butterfly Recording, Butterflies New Millennium, and you can enter your data there. And then finally, while you're out recording, why not record everything you see? Because just the butterflies is obviously a good thing, compared with not recording the butterflies. But just the butterflies is only the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? And there is a sister app to the Butterfly iRecord app. The iRecord Butterflies app is actually just a subset of the massive iRecord, which you can use on your phone, smartphone, or you can use iRecord through your PC and record everything you've seen on each visit, which we hope you will be doing. But at this point, I shall stop and I shall see what questions come in. I shall be very happy to answer any questions.
So you've got just the one question for now, which is, if purple emperors are light on dog poo, are they affected by the worming medications that most dog owners give their dogs and therefore will be in the canine output?
A good question that I'm afraid I can't answer. I would imagine they must be, because we know that aquatic animals are suffering really badly as the result of cats and dogs being treated with flea treatments. So I can only assume that anything you give a dog or a cat in order to treat insect and other invertebrates that get inside it will affect a purple emperor. So that's a very good question. I've not considered that. So maybe it's not such a good thing that there are millions of dog owners. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh, that's blighted my evening. I shall worry about that all night now. Good question. Yeah, I wish. Oh dear.
Yeah, I imagine no one studied that so far. And we've got a question from Toby, who's raised his hand. So do you want to unmute?
Hi, Nick. Sorry, but I can't operate my chat tonight. It's not working. But I just wondered, I'm in Banbury, North Oxfordshire, and I wonder if you could recommend any sites, woodlands that I could visit to look at some of the butterflies that you've been mentioning tonight, please.
Well, around Banbury, I don't know any woodlands that are especially good, although there may well be some. The trouble up there is that quite a few of the better woodlands or better looking woodlands are private. So I've not been in them. So I'm afraid you might need to go as far south as Burnwood, Whitecross, Greenwood, those woods around the M40. There are some very good sites up there. There's Ardley Quarry isn't all that far, I think. Is it called Foxholes or Foxcoats Reserve up there? So there are some good bits. Have a look at the BBAT website for their reserves in your area. And then just over into Gloucestershire, they've also got some good reserves. But again, I think they're quite a way west of where you are in Banbury. It's rather unfortunate. I don't live that way myself, so I don't know it well, but I do know that some of the better bits up there are in private hands. And at the moment, we don't have any relationships with the owners of those estates, those woodlands. It will come because we're getting more and more all the time, but we don't have them yet. Sorry, okay. Toby, can't give you any really. Perhaps somebody else who's in this chat, in this Zoom, can unmute in a bit and give you a tip about where to go.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. It is a bit strange because we're on the edge of three counties, Warwickshire, yes, Northamptonshire and Oxfordshire. So it's a bit difficult sometimes to know where to go, but thanks for your advice anyway. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
We've got a question in the chat that says, what happens to butterflies when there are long periods of unseasonably cold weather?
Well, if we start with when it's unseasonably cold for a few days, they quite simply shut down. And I suspect to them, it's exactly the same whether it's 3 days of cold, unseasonable weather or just one night. I think they're sort of pretty much out of it. And they can live for a long time in very poor weather. So that isn't a problem. The trouble is when it goes on, as it is at the moment, with very short periods of quite warm weather when the sun shines and it doesn't rain for an hour, and they're tempted to come out, fly around and do whatever butterflies do, but then it goes back to being cold and rather unpleasant. And that means they burn up their energy when they are flying about, and they won't last quite so long when it's cold afterwards. So they will last longer in cold weather because they don't use any energy when they're just sat there doing nothing. And by and large, it isn't so cold or so wet that it will damage them. So they will be about. We just need the weather to settle so that they can actually make the most of it. And it could well be that at the minute, the weather forecasters always seem to be saying it'll be better in 10 days' time, but they are forecasting better weather in just about 10 days' time. And if we get there and it is 4 or 5 days of truly settled good weather, there could be huge numbers of butterflies about. They'd all been sat around just waiting for the opportunity. Let's hope.
Well, no more questions so far, just some thanks going to you. Any more questions?
We'll certainly wait for a little while, because I wouldn't be surprised if there are questions, although I know people can be reluctant to ask them.
Can I just say thank you again to you, Nick, for presenting. Always good to hear you talk in such depth and knowledge about all the butterflies. So thank you very much. Well presented. While we're waiting for any more questions, and could you just remind us where we can find the video, because we're going to be putting this recording up online. I forgot to say at the beginning.
That's a good point, Carla. So for anyone who wants to watch again, so that they can pause each slide if they want to see what information is there, it'll all be up on the Upper Thames Branch website. So if you search Upper Thames Branch butterflies, you'll find our website, and it's in events. There is, under the drop down menu, when you click on the tab for events, there is a section called online events, and all the recordings that we've made so far are there. And I know, Carla, I was saying how great it is that so many people are logging into your Zoom sessions, but there have been even more people have been looking at them online afterwards. So we have had literally hundreds of people watching these. So all thanks to Parks Trust.
And to you, Nick, for help, for organising it in the first place. So we,
right,
thank you very much. I think we'll give you a round of applause. We can clap your hands.
That's kind. Oh, I didn't realise you could do that online. That's nice. That's in the reactions, I assume.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm surprised there are no more questions. Perhaps I was especially lucid this evening instead of my usual stumbling self.
No, very well presented, as always.
Right. Well, I certainly don't want to keep everybody waiting to see if anything's going to happen if it isn't. So
I think we all
perhaps
can't
we give
wait.
it one more minute. Sorry.
I think we all can't wait to get outside when the weather gets better, really. That's a...
Yes, that's definitely true.
Yeah, lots of thank yous.
Yeah. Well, thank you to Ellen as well for watching things come in as they did. Really helpful.
We've got one last question coming in. Do male butterflies appear before females?
Yes. In most species, the males fly first, and there are quite a few different theories have been put forward over the years as to what advantage it is to them that the males appear first. I'm not quite sure that any of them are totally convincing, but the males of almost every butterfly species appear several days, even weeks in some cases, before the females. And then when the females come out, the males are all there waiting for them. So presumably it helps the females to get mated more easily if the males are out first. And I can see that Stephen has sort of put a second bit to his question, saying he's seen no female orange tips. Well, I was saying yesterday that I hadn't seen any orange tip eggs yet. So I'll just throw this in for anyone who wants to look. Around here, the food plant used by the orange tip is Jack by the hedge, which is a little white crucifer. And I found one plant today with 4 eggs on it, and yesterday 2 plants with 1 egg. And the eggs of the orange tip look like little orange skittles laid amongst the flower cluster at the top of the plant. If you're on a clay soil, cuckoo flower, sometimes called lady's smock, is the flower that's used. And in gardens, they can use both honesty and, is it called Dame's Violet, or did I just say that? No, Dame's Violet is the other food plant for the orange tip. So you can look for the eggs, and quite often, even though you haven't seen a female, you'll discover that the eggs are around by some magic process. The females have flown through and you've not spotted them, but there are eggs.
We got a question that says that she saw a silver fritillary on the 9th of June last year. Is it not very likely that they'll be out that early this year?
I would say it was very unlikely, but butterflies are so peculiar. We know so little about them that you can never say it's impossible. I think, well, this is a fairly good example. The first small heath in Britain this year was seen in March. But when I looked online last week, so it was the end of the second week of May, quite a few counties in Britain, the small heath flies in all of them, all the way up to Scotland, still hadn't been seen. Even in places like Essex, no one had seen a small heath. So lots of butterflies are really late this year. The individual butterfly glass bottle on the floor, and the butterfly's caterpillar happens to have pupated near that, and then the sun shining on the bottle has warmed them up or something, because there are just a few butterflies coming out crazy early. But I don't think we're going to see silverwash fritillary before July this year. But we'll see. We might get some hot weather in June, but I don't think so. Well, I've blathered quite a lot, but I think we probably have exhausted the questions. So thank you very much, Ellen, and thank you very much, Carla. Thanks to the Parks Trust. But maybe it's time now to say that we're going to close the meeting.
Indeed, I'll definitely stop recording.